What do you think is the most important company in crypto over the next 10 years?
I was having this debate with someone the other day. Look, I think Bitmain has been one of these companies that
Interesting.
like has been so underappreciated and just has silently built an empire. Same thing with Bitfury. We don't really talk about mining, but like these companies are building next generation, not just Bitcoin infrastructure, but compute infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And for blockchain to work at scale, the networking layer has to be really robust, which is going to require a lot of like next gen compute infrastructure. And so we see the existing fabs are just starting to get on the ASIC and GPU mining bandwagon. But these guys have already been there. And so I think that's going to be really interesting to watch that battle. The other company I think is really underappreciated. I mean, everyone talks about Binance and like how revolutionary Binance is. I actually think people aren't paying enough attention to platforms like Shapeshift and Abra. And really their mantra is we want to enable users to transact and invest and trade in a private, secure way. These non-custodial designs, I think, are really important to enabling crypto to really spread. If we want to truly create a better financial system, owning your own assets, truly owning your own assets is really important. And Coinbase and Binance and all of these platforms that facilitate trading, they've become central banks. They've become points of failure. So I think companies like Abra and Shapeshift and others in this vein who are enabling trading, holding, storing, where you have full custodial, well, you have full control and full discretion over what happens, really critical.
Absolutely. Let's go back to mining for a second, because I think that your point about how undervalued these companies are, right? So the two things that are top of mind for me, Bitmain specifically. So one is a lot of people in the crypto community, when they see success, right, there's two paths that they can go down. One is either they walk, right, and hey, I made a bunch of money and I'm gonna take it and go enjoy life, or the other is they get really, really bold and ambitious, right? And I think that's what we're seeing with Bitmain, right? Is they're saying, look, we've had a bunch of success, we've been able to drive a bunch of capital, right? When they their last round they raised, I believe that outsiders of the company owned less than 5%, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden now they're talking a little bit more about artificial intelligence, machine learning, compute that is used for non-mining or non-crypto applications.
Yeah.
And it goes back to this idea that, everyone says data is the new oil, right? And if data is the new oil.
I threw up in my mouth for everyone listening. When Tom said that, I have like vomit on my lips right now.
Right? So it's everyone who says that, I always respond with, if data is the new oil, computing is the new steel. Right? Because you actually need the infrastructure to let that whole data-driven world exist.
Okay. So hold on, let's talk about this. So I think the most underappreciated layer of the crypto space is the network space, right? So we think about ICOs and tokens. All of the capital formation is happening at the protocol layer, right? Everyone's like, protocols, amazing. And then we see sorry. And then we see the application layer, right? That's where the VCs, like traditional VCs, are like, I only do equity. And they're investing in applications. And then we see people trying to get around that by doing these app coin things. But no one's really focusing on that middle layer that enables protocols and technical design to get implemented in physical compute space. And we see this because these networks people are building are not robust.
Absolutely.
Like, look at what's happened with Ethereum. Look at what's happening with EOS. Look at like these new networks that are launching. They're not secure, they're not robust. And the problem is that if we're going to live in a world with thousands of blockchains, they're all going to require expression in physical compute space. And where's that infrastructure going to come from? How specialized does it need to be? And then does that actually become the new domain for competition? Because we can easily raise capital at the protocol layer and at the app layer, but at the networking layer there's an actual physical constraint to implementation because there's a limited amount of compute.
Absolutely.
And so to me, investing in compute, and I want to create structured products that offer compute capacity to protocols. Like if you raise money through an ICO for your protocol, you should be buying compute with that money. You should be buying dedicated networking infrastructure that's resilient and robust and that is secure and de-risked so that your protocol can run in all sorts of adversarial environments.
Well, if you think of the compute that's previously been available, it's been very CPU heavy, right? Because that's what the networks and the consumer applications, et cetera, required. We're now moving to a world where ASICs, GPUs are becoming much more valuable. And I think you and I have talked about like the idea to even go and start to get legacy infrastructure companies under your control and then start swapping the CPUs out for GPUs, ASICs, etc. Super interesting. Now,
it's also really, it's a cost of production game, right? So if we think about vertical integration, integrating power production with manufacturing, with actually operating a facility, right?
Absolutely.
This is the perfect oil and gas example. I spent, 7 years of my career, started my life in building big infrastructure projects that took 20 years to build and cost $20 to $40 billion.
Yep.
We look at the crypto space, right? If this is truly going to be a massive industry that's heavily focused on building new network infrastructure that's resilient, secure, decentralized, whatever, we need a physical expression of that. That's infrastructure financing. That's very different from financing a protocol. That's structured finance. It's principal plus interest. And finding new ways to effectively, like, infrastructure financing is all about reconciling the mismatch of cash flows, right? You end up using a bunch of cash, but you don't get any in until 5-10 years from now.
Yep.
Same thing in the crypto space. Very few people have had the vision and the foresight to understand that networking space and that physical compute layer is so critical.
Well, it was it's actually how I got involved in crypto.
This is how you and I became friends.
So my family's been in the data center business forever, right? And what I saw was in the traditional data center business, space, power, hardware, operations, right? In
and
mining,
technology, by the way.
Yeah. In mining, you have space, power, hardware, and operations. It's just the hardware's different, right?
Yep.
And the part that got me was you can drive more yield and take the same amount of risk, right? And then you don't have to deal with customers.
Well, and the yield component, that's because, like, right now when people bid on compute space, on AWS, right? And when they're doing that, there's a limited amount of margin you can capture. And really, the amount of margin you can capture is a function of demand, right? There's a supply and demand component. What people don't recognize is mining is the same thing, but in addition to that supply and demand sort of price point, you also have this inflationary reward in a lot of these protocols, right? And so I think what people aren't understanding is the intractable relationship between protocol design and physical compute implementation. And this is where I think the idea of decentralization really isn't truly possible until we find a way to remove this compute infrastructure constraint. That's where I think, like, really new ideas around consensus design. So Algorand's gossip passing protocol, Chia and Space Mesh, so there's very different implementations of proof of space and time. Even I think some of what Filecoin's thinking about is really thinking about, like, how do you disintermediate and decentralize the compute layer? Yep. And to me, that'll be the narrative that dominates crypto from, like, 2020 till 2025. Absolutely. I don't know. Wild ideas. Super fun, though. I love, it's just these are such fun, thorny problems. And sometimes thinking about them, like, makes me dizzy. But yeah, it's really interesting.